Between the Rows is brought to you by Smart Nutrition MAP plus MST. Experience the latest, most efficient fertilizer system for delivering sulfur and phosphate to your crops when they need it. Learn how to boost your soil's performance and maximize ROI with Smart Nutrition MAP plus MST at smartnutritionmst.com.
Hello and welcome to Between the Rows. I'm your host this week, Dave Bedard. On this episode, I'm not really trying to have a big overarching theme, but if I had to make one up, because it's the short week after Thanksgiving, I'd go with sharing. But I'm not talking about making sure everybody got enough gravy or cranberry. I'm thinking of the sorts of things we share with other people about ourselves. And we're going to be talking about social media a little later on today, where we maybe all tend to overshare a little bit. But first up today, we're talking about the one topic we all tend to avoid sharing on in favor of just about anything else, namely our finances. And in the new issue of Country Guide that's just out, you'll see something a little different on that matter. And here to talk about that, we have Country Guide Associate Editor Laura Stevenson. Hi, Lorraine, and welcome back to Between the Rows.
Hello, Dave.
One of your feature articles this month does something that Country Guide rarely, if ever, does. Let's start there.
Yeah, we did not reveal the family's identity in this story, Dave. They had a very important story to tell, and they were willing to share it with us, but they requested anonymity. So this was a rare opportunity. As you just said, this matter of financial trouble for any of us, and of course on the farm, is not something widely talked about at all. We see our finances as very private matters. And frankly, I think we are much more open to talking about very personal matters than we are about our money. So we wanted to do this story, though, because it was, as we say, an important story to tell, and it was a way of laying out options for others who find themselves in similar types of financial predicaments.
Mm-hmm. And, normally, people not revealing their names would be incredibly problematic. People who don't got to give their names could say just about anything if they wanted. Mm-hmm. But their farm financial advisor did make himself available to you for this article.
Yeah, that's right. They told their story through him. It was the farm advisor, Mr. Art Lang, that I interviewed. I did not speak directly to the family themselves.
Okay. I mean, it's not unheard of. I mean, I remember the Globe and Mail, they would have these regular articles with people in, various states of financial stress, or even people just trying to plan ahead for the future. But, they'd be using pseudonyms and, hiding behind books or potted plants or whatever in the picture, and they'd have their financial advisors or some financial advisors in the article talking about these people and, ways to deal with their very specific situation. This isn't quite the same thing that you've got here, but it's certainly a very important story to tell. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to give it all away here, of course. I want people to pick up the magazine or check out your feature at country-guide.ca. Please check it out. So to make a long story very short, though, their best laid plans, they took a fairly dramatic turn for the worse. And before long, their lender was threatening to foreclose. I mean, what did this couple wind up doing?
Well, they did eventually contact this advisor, Mr. Art Lang, and he sat down with them and basically laid on the table what their options were. And as he said to me, as he's worked with other families in other types of financial struggles, he goes over basically 5 options. And selling assets is one of them. Generating off-farm income is another option. Increasing farm income by expanding the existing operation, or reducing expenses is a third option. And diversifying the farm with adding another enterprise is another. Financial restructuring, that is amortizing existing debt over a longer period, is of course another option. And that's what this couple did decide to do. They also chose to increase farm income by expanding their cattle herd, but they decided to go through a financial restructuring process. And they did that, again, working very closely with their advisor, who prepared a business plan for them. And he circulated that plan to several lenders. And fortunately, in fact, it was the last conventional lender they approached, fortunately, that lender did agree to the plan as it had been laid out.
Mm-hmm. Now, people who are in a financial scrape, they might not be ready to admit that there's a problem, but that that's something that your featured advisor, Mr. Lange, says it's very difficult generally for people to do. So what kind of a mindset does a farmer need to adopt when casting an eye over his or her financial situation?
Well, I felt that some of his strongest advice in this article is to deal with these issues sooner rather than later. This couple, in fact, did reach out to him earlier. They had made some general inquiries with him, so they clearly could see trouble on their horizon, and they knew they did need advice. But I think maybe what happened is they felt they could manage and figure things out on their own entirely. So some time did elapse before they contacted him again and then made a firm request for his services. But by then they were in quite a crisis, and their lender at the time was threatening to foreclose on them. So they were in a very serious predicament. So again, this is the proverbial bull by the horns.
Mm-hmm. And as you mentioned, before people can admit that there's a problem, they have to recognize, they have to be able to recognize that there is one. And you do cover some of these red flags in your article. I was wondering if we could look at some of those.
Yeah, some of the common signs of trouble that Mr. Lang talked about are the things that maybe we can all kind of see, but we can often just try to kick down the road. And those would be things like not paying our bills on time, or not paying all of the bills on time, or just knowing we're unable to meet cash flow obligations, which usually goes with having to borrow more money via different means, and or we start running up accounts payable. Getting a call from your banker, from your lender, to come in and have a talk.
Oh, that's never good.
Of course, a big flag.
Yeah.
And if you're not returning those calls when you get them, that's a very serious flag. Very serious. And Mr. Lang talks about that, and he also says, there are signs within families that there's trouble brewing, and those signs can be the families not talking to each other. There's lack of open family discussion about the finances and the problems that may be related to them, or there's refusal to address them when the conversation goes that direction. So, and then of course there's those sleepless nights that are filled with our worries and not really knowing what options are even available. So not even really knowing how to begin to explore options.
Whereas some people might even be able to sleep a little easier just knowing that, just knowing what their options are and being able to think about those. Now,
start to weigh them back and forth, right?
One thing that's also mentioned is that it's not really wise to view the farm lender as the bad guy, the adversary, the nemesis. But it's probably best not to be BFFs. But
yeah, that again was another very important piece of advice that Mr. Lang offered in this article, and it was to keep and maintain a good relationship with your lender. He said, after you've recognized you've got a problem, the next critical step is to speak to your lender to explain whatever situation is developing and ask for that time to pay or restructure or do whatever you need to do. He really stressed that it's important to realize that lenders themselves realize that borrowers can run into trouble. And what they want to know, he said, was how are you going to deal with this, and how are you going to work your way through it? And that means going in for that critically important meeting with a game plan. That, in other words, a plan with some numbers attached to it, and to be able to show that you're thinking about this, you've thought this through, and you understand your options, and that you are weighing those options. That's a conversation that you do need to have.
And that's some very important advice to share as well. Lorraine Stevenson, thank you so much for your time.
You're most welcome, Dave.
Lorraine Stevenson is an associate editor in Southern Manitoba with Country Guide magazine. You're listening to Between the Rows. I'm your host this week, Dave Bedard. So while we're all sharing here, I'm trying not to take it personally when my phone tells me every week how many more hours per day I've been spending with it. I want to tell it that if it's got a problem with how much time we spend together, maybe I should start seeing other phones. Truth is, the COVID-19 pandemic has put a lid on a lot of the interactions that we have with other people, usually every day. For a lot of farmers, one might not think it's as much of a problem, that social distancing is, part of the ag life. But of course, farmers are also people, people who need people. And the pandemic did knock out a lot of farm meetings and farm shows, or in the best case scenario, it pushed a lot of those online. And there's now some data to suggest that individual farmers were way ahead of them in getting there. Waiting here for me to stop talking, we have Michelle Austin, who's the head of Government, Public Policy and Philanthropy with Twitter Canada. Ms. Austin, hello and welcome to Between the Rows.
Hello, thank you very much, and surprised to hear a Barbra Streisand reference there, but thrilled.
Oh, you're very welcome. Let's talk first about the hashtag data that you've been blogging about recently. You've noticed an uptick in the use of hashtag #AgTwitter, all one word there. What can you tell us about that?
Well, the conversation about agriculture and farming on Twitter in Canada has always been strong, but this year we have seen real growth in the use of the hashtag #AgTwitter. So hashtags allow people to find a space online where they can gather without actually having to know the person that they're talking to. They can follow the hashtag. And the #AgTwitter hashtag in Canada has seen a 12% increase this year over last.
And that's within Canada alone.
Yeah, that's just within Canada. Now, of course, the #AgTwitter hashtag knows no geographic boundaries. I mean, search that now and you'll get conversations in Australia and the United States, all around the world. But this data is just for Canada.
Okay. And you said you're also seeing conversations that aren't necessarily about production agriculture around the #AgTwitter hashtag?
The agriculture industry, farmers, ranchers, they've always been very vocal, if you can say it that way, on Twitter. And this year, even more so. And the conversations are huge. So mental health is a really big one. And I think it's really important for everyone this year. It's always been important for the farming, ranching, and agricultural community. So we often see the hashtag mental health with the hashtag #AgTwitter. There's also wonderful, fun hashtags like #fail when somebody, loses their phone while they're bailing, and it's somewhere in a bale of hay out there. So, yeah, nobody wants to be drowning in hashtags on social media, but when you pair #AgTwitter with another hashtag, like maybe #corn, #mental health, #fail, it really allows a lot more people to figure out what you're talking about and join in that conversation.
And you said too that people are using the #AgTwitter hashtag who might be talking as well about even topics that aren't necessarily ag related, such as like banking or finance or stocks and off-farm investments and whatnot. Is that also still happening?
And politics, especially for the agriculture community. Yes, absolutely. So, there's a technical term for it. It's called narrowcasting, where you want to have a discussion with your community. And online, there's multiple communities. There's gaming Twitter, there's sports Twitter or hockey Twitter, and there's agriculture Twitter. But, you don't have to be a member of a single community to join that conversation. And I've always been impressed by the opinions that the agricultural community is willing to put out online without any filters and aggressively. And so absolutely, the #AgTwitter community is talking about everything. Health, politics is a really, really big, important issue for the community. And they're really, they're their real selves on Twitter. And we certainly enjoy the conversations and the issues that are discussed.
Now, from your perspective, looking over this landscape of farm tweets, are you seeing any sort of broader motives out there? I mean, that is, what do Canadian farmers appear to want most? I mean, is it just the social media tendency to share for fun, or to share with a purpose, or to seek out information, or even extension advice from other farmers, or?
Well, I don't think that there's a single thing that they want, except for maybe to communicate the pride they have in what they're doing, for which we are incredibly grateful, because, it's often a lonely job out there by yourself, but the things that you get to see and do are fantastic. And they're using social media with a lot of images, or what we would call media assets. So we're seeing a lot of images I've seen farmers who have rescued owls that got stuck on their combines. I've seen wonderful images of families working together. Certainly, Twitter is used in real time, and there have been calls for help. When something bad has happened, I've seen my friend Danny Hozak unfortunately had a fire in Vegreville, and I saw that on Twitter from here in Ottawa. It was quite horrible, but I also saw the people running to help with them. And so Twitter is in real time, right? If you want to know what's happening right now, you go to Twitter. And so I think we see a lot of that as in real time. Boy, what horrible weather we've had, hail out here in Saskatchewan, and it's really hurt the crop. And has anybody else suffering with this? Or, lost a part, looking for a part, does anybody else have it? So I think they're just real conversations about the work that's happening. But if there's an overarching theme, it's the pride in what they do.
And to that end too, I mean, I've seen, of course, during seeding and harvest, right now during harvest too. I mean, we're seeing the hashtags. We saw the hashtag plant 20, hashtag harvest 20. From my perspective as an interested third party, I mean, it's been instructive to see, where it's being used and when, to get an idea of, how early or late seeding and harvest were happening, where they were happening, what parts of the country, or indeed in other countries they were happening too.
Yeah, those are universal hashtags, and we love them. So it doesn't matter what year you're in. You just do hashtag plant and then 19, 20, and next year 21. And I completely agree with your assessment. It's really interesting to see what's happening in other areas. If people are going through the same thing that you're going through, if their crop is ahead or behind yours, if you are dealing with great or terrible weather. So I just recently saw a interesting harvest 20 tweet out of Saskatchewan saying best weather ever for the harvest, worst harvest ever. And so I think people are looking for a sense of community and understanding where somebody can say, yep, been there. I feel a little bit better that I'm going through this, or that I need to share about this. So the plant and harvest hashtags come up every year at different times. So we're going through plant 20, essentially, or 21 in Australia. And so, yes, you can check it all out around the world to see how that hashtag is used and to see what your comrades in arms are going through.
I remember even when people were still harvesting crops left over after the horrible harvest weather we had last year. They were unsure whether to start in right away with hashtag harvest 20.
Still going.
Yeah. Exactly. Now, you noted one thing you mentioned just a second ago too. There was 5 crop specific hashtags with the most Canadian mentions from May through September. Hashtag corn, hashtag soybeans, hashtag canola, wheat, grain. Corn and soybean production, they have been expanding westward, of course, but can we take from this that ag Twitter is sort of more of a prevalent thing in the east where the corn and soybeans are grown than in the west, or?
In fact, it's quite the opposite. Saskatchewan over-indexes on ag Twitter. We've been trying to get this blog together for a long time, and of course, COVID interrupted everybody's plans. But we really we had to try hard to make sure that we had representation from more than just the prairies. And I think, that's just, in many ways, having lived out west, that's a prairie way of life, right? The people are so important, and they're very comfortable in expressing themselves. But no, the West is really deeply involved in this conversation. So it's fairly equal across where you think it's going to be across the province, right? Rural Ontario as well. So no, that doesn't reflect where people are. What it does reflect is what they're doing and they're engaging in at that time.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned the COVID-19 pandemic as well. What's your sense of the role that Twitter has taken in the pandemic? I mean, has it been business as usual, but more of it, or has people's consumption changed? I mean, I alluded to it off the top, but are people using these tools for even more now as a substitute of the sort of in-person dialogue they used to get during ag shows and during meeting season?
Absolutely. Just generally, Twitter has seen a 23% increase in users, which is not surprising because you also come to Twitter for the news, right? And so COVID-19 has certainly been a big news story. But what we're seeing is the equivalent of in-person parties happening online. And again, that's where you can really use a hashtag. So, if you are supposed to be at an event or you want to talk to somebody who from another place who might be at that event, that's where people are coming to Twitter online to engage. So they're talking to each other through a conversation, through replies, through tweets in real time. And, some people call it a watch party or some people call it an event party, but other times people just meet online and they say, okay, for instance, it's World Mental Health Day on Saturday, October the 10th, and people are going to meet online to talk about their mental health, especially in the agricultural community, because maybe they're more comfortable doing it, but it's certainly also more convenient, especially when you can't meet in person.
And even before that, there were the sort of the regular events that were going on too. Scott Mears from Alberta Agriculture hosting his ag bug chat, that kind of thing, or his Alberta bug chat. Now, your blog post on the subject, it also included a number of Canadian farmer accounts that you like. I was wondering if you could talk about some of those and what made them stand out for you.
Absolutely. So we wanted to go for people who we knew would be on Twitter, of course, and also sort of a real sense of different people bringing in different parts of the country who are doing different things in farming. So we have Ness Farm, who is Vanessa Duran from Kemptville, Ontario, and she does some ranching and some farming. We have Kim Keller, who's at Kim Keller. She's really an amazing person. She also runs Do More Ag, and she's extremely engaged on Twitter. We have Kowalchuk Farms out of Rumsey, Alberta, and they are lovely in terms of the images that they post. So there's quite a few that are in there. Meg Reynolds, Farmer Megs, she's also very political. She's from Kyle, Saskatchewan, very vocal on Twitter. So these are individuals that we know are really confident in sharing what they're doing, but also are engaging. I mean, the whole point of being on Twitter also is to try and have a conversation, not just to sort of get your megaphone and blast out into the world. So there's 10 accounts that are on there, and I'm sure we've missed some really wonderful accounts, and everybody can certainly send them to me, that we think are worth following if you want to get a great picture of what's happening in the agricultural industry in Canada.
Now, if I'm a farmer who's just getting started on Twitter, now you mentioned that there's been an uptick in Twitter use. Is that in new accounts or in just sort of overall traffic?
No, that's in new accounts.
Wow.
So we've got lots and lots of people coming to try. Well, I mean, you can't talk to your neighbor, right? Or depending on where you are. If you're in the Atlantic bubble, maybe you can. But people really want to know what's going on in the world, and they really want to hear from Canadians from their neighbors and from their politicians what's going on. So that's one of the reasons why they've come to Twitter.
Now, if I'm a farmer just getting started on Twitter, what's the best way to find my people? Than to keep finding them when I need them.
So there's a couple of recommendations that I would make for people who want to give it a try on Twitter, and it's really, I mean, such a wonderful community. So first of all, make yourself discoverable. Take the time to write a bio, write a little bit about yourself. That isn't just I plant radishes. It needs to be more about who you are, what you do, and where you are. So that will help us try and surface a little bit more information of people who are close to you. And then when you get tweet, get out there, give it a try. I know sometimes it's a little scary and intimidating, but use a couple of hashtags that hashtag ag Twitter, hashtag Canadian Ag, CDN Ag, and search also when you use those hashtags afterwards. So if you just hit that hashtag after you tweet and you use it, will surface a lot of other accounts that are the same. And what makes it important to make sure that you understand where your community is that we know if you put where your location is, right? You probably want to be talking to people in your community, not necessarily in Brazil. And so, as you learn more about how Twitter works and follow some of those accounts and use some of those hashtags, you'll end up finding people who are going through what you're going through or are learning something from somebody who's doing it a little differently.
And also people will be sharing, the cool photos of the snake climbing up the combine in Brazil and whatnot. And
it's the spiders in Australia that I could do without.
Oh, but no. Farmers might not necessarily be looking for follows, but it seems to me that a person is sure likely to get answers to questions or concern a lot sooner if they have like a good base of followers. I mean, should people be sort of angling to build up a follower base, or just sort of keep doing what they do and let it happen?
Well, I don't think I think you want to make sure that you build up an authentic follower base, and one of the ways that you do that is you engage. So you click that heart, you click that like button, you reply, you comment, you say, "Oh my gosh, good luck," or "Thinking of you," or "What a wonderful picture," or you like you would talk to somebody that you would meet at a show or at an event, and you want to be able to do that online. So take the time to like somebody's. It's as easy as liking what somebody's doing. Take the time to reply to them, take the time to follow them, and maybe they'll follow back. But I think what you're really searching for is a conversation that you would be able to have in person that maybe because of COVID-19 you can't.
Mm-hmm. And we should probably talk a bit about Twitter etiquette here too. I mean, especially in sort of this polarized climate we're living in. I mean, the States being the obvious example, but it's not just in the States either. I tend to find a lot of very thoughtful or very interesting posts from the ag sector when I'm on Twitter looking for such things. But on social media in general, I've certainly had to block a lot of creepy people to get my feeds the way I want them.
Well, you're in charge, right? And I think everybody has to remember that with regard to any social media platform. Twitter is different because it's public, right? So I don't have to ask you if I can follow you. I just hit the follow button to follow you. And so I think there's two things that you have to do. First of all, to your point, if you don't like who's followed you, you can mute them or block them. The difference is if with mute, they don't know that you've muted them. But if you block someone, they'll know. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't be afraid to use it. It would be like you wouldn't talk to somebody if you saw them anyway. But then from another point, you do certainly want to, tweet as you wish to be tweeted, right? So you definitely want to make sure that you are respectful and nice. And if you want to talk about politics, by all means, go ahead and do that. But remember, you're going to get a lot of really passionate people talking about politics. But I mean, that's the same with anything. If you're in gaming, you want to talk about a passionate community. The gaming community is very passionate on Twitter. People come to Twitter because they're really passionate about what they do and they want to talk about it. And that goes back to our talk at the beginning about pride and the pride that people feel in what they do. So, I mean, there's certainly people on Twitter who we call listeners. They just listen. They scroll through their feed. They're informed. They want to know what other people are doing, and they don't necessarily engage. And that's just fine. So do what is you on social media, and remember, you're always in charge.
Mm-hmm. And that's very good advice to wrap up our conversation here. I thank you very much for your time. I'm really glad to have you on the show.
Thank you so much as well.
Michelle Austin is the head of government and public policy and philanthropy with Twitter Canada. You're listening to Between the Rows. I'm your host this week, Dave Bedard. Well, grain and oilseed futures still appear to be well on the upside of their short and medium-term moving averages for now, but after a stretch of bullish data and reports from both the U.S. and overseas, it looks like harvest pressure has become a little more of a factor in U.S. markets. It's the afternoon of Tuesday, October 13th as we speak of this, and Bruce Burnett, Director of Weather and Markets for Glacier Markets Farm, is here to help us make sense of it all. Bruce, hi, and welcome back to Between the Rows.
Good to be here.
So when I was setting up this call this morning, I was looking out at blue skies here in Winnipeg, and then it got a lot more gray and windy and cloudy, and now it's blue skies and partly cloudy. I'll ask about U.S. markets in a minute, but first I should ask about Canadian weather and the state of what's left, if anything, to harvest up here.
Well, certainly we're down to the very last ends of the harvest, even in some of the northern growing areas that had been a little bit more delayed than other parts of the prairie. So we will see that all three provinces will be reporting close to complete on the harvest this week. So essentially what's left out are a few areas up in northern Alberta, northwestern Saskatchewan, as well as some of the longer season crops, corn and soybeans, but especially corn in southern Manitoba. So, and in parts of southeastern Saskatchewan. So really harvested for all intents and purposes is wrapping up here. And it has been a very good harvest, very high quality in all of the grains and oilseeds, with the exception of a little bit of frost damage. But I think overall this is certainly a positive outcome for Western Canadian farmers this year, considering the harvest that we went through in 2019.
And what about U.S. weather insofar as it affects our markets? I mean, crops seem to be getting sold down there off the combine, and it also looks like there are at least some parts of that country where the winter wheat crop is going in pretty dry.
Yes, that's right. And in fact, we've seen a rally in the wheat market here over the past 2 to 3 weeks. It's been a very halting rally, but a rally nonetheless. And what's been driving it has been some dryness, not only in the U.S., but in parts of Russia, Ukraine, for the planting of this year's winter wheat crops. So certainly the market's focused now, at least on the wheat side, for 2021 production. And it is a concern as we head into the winter period here in some parts of the world, as far as what kind of moisture is available to get the crops germinated and emerged. Of course, the biggest concern for winter wheat is just getting the crop established before winter sets in, so it can withstand some of the cooler temperatures that we know are going to be following here in January and February. So that's the biggest concern right now. There is the tendency for people to get overly excited about it in the marketplace. So again, just keep that in mind as we start moving through the next few months of the production cycle.
Now, on Friday last week, USDA put out its World Agricultural Supply and Demand Estimates, aka the WASDE report. Those figures seemed pretty supportive for soybean, corn, and wheat futures at the time. Is with that in mind, is harvest pressure likely to remain a thing?
Well, again, certainly for the row crops, the corn and the soybeans, harvest pressure is going to be with us for the next 2 to 3 weeks as the U.S. farmers move through the heart of their corn and soybean harvest. I would say, again, by the end of this week, we're probably going to see soybeans again move into less of a harvest pressure mode, just because the bulk of the crop will be, or at least over 50% of the crop will be harvested. On the corn side, harvest pressure is probably going to be a reality here through into the first week of November. Again, this is nothing new. The only difference, I think, especially in the oilseed markets, is that we're seeing very strong export sales as well as export shipments. So U.S. Export shipments of soybeans have been very strong, and we expect that to continue here, obviously, because they have booked a lot of sales for this year. So that's going to modify this impact of the harvest pressure. It isn't going to linger. Especially as we see the U.S. Exporting a lot of their production right off the hop here.
Mm-hmm. And one last thing, the canola market had Thanksgiving off from trading yesterday because it still follows the Canadian calendar. U.S. markets didn't take the day off, though. I'm just wondering from a market's perspective, is there any kind of benefit or detriment to not necessarily having these markets trading in lockstep year round?
Well, again, these markets tend to arbitrage with each other. In other words, as one goes up, the other one will go up in sympathy, even though they're not exactly the same commodity. But certainly for canola, it does follow the oilseeds market. I don't think there's a distinct advantage of having different holidays. We don't run into that only a few days of the year. Mm-hmm. And certainly by the next day, it certainly catches up, shall we say. So, for instance, today, soybeans had moved higher after being sharply lower yesterday, and canola finished downwards just because it missed yesterday's trading. But again, there's no real advantage here. As soon as we get into the middle and the end of the next week, there'll be a lot of other issues that markets will be looking at as we take out any of the impacts that occurred on Monday.
And soybeans did have a bit of a drop off as yesterday, just because of just in sort of response to the just in response to harvest pressure and what have you, right?
Yeah, soybeans were down 30 cents. Again, we had a big rally on Friday, dropped about 28 to 30 cents a bushel on Monday, partially because USDA was off on the Columbus Day holiday. So we saw no reported sales, which have been driving the markets. But also, we had a weekend worth of harvest pressure to accumulate. So we did see some hedge pressure come into to Chicago soybean market on Monday. Again, that seemed to flip around on Tuesday here. So we did get part of those gains back.
And with that, we've got the rest of the month and Halloween, of course, to look forward to. Bruce, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks a lot.
Bruce Burnett is Director of Weather and Markets for Glacier Markets Farm. That's all the time we have for this week. I'd like to thank our guests, Lorraine Stevenson, Michelle Austin, and last but never least, Bruce Burnett. And we'll be back in a week with more for you from the Glacier FarmMedia family of publications. You've been listening to Between the Rows. I've been your host this week, Dave Bedard. Thanks for listening.
Between the Rows is brought to you by Smart Nutrition MAP plus MST. Experience the latest, most efficient fertilizer system for delivering sulfur and phosphate to your crops when they need it. Learn how to boost your soil's performance and maximize ROI with Smart Nutrition MAP plus MST at smartnutritionmst.com.